Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Center for Environmental Health's second Audacious Action virtual town hall. Our first town hall last month was about how to stay healthy and safe during the pandemic. A couple thousand people watched it live, and you can find it on our website. If you didn't already know, CEH is a nonprofit dedicated to protecting people from toxic chemicals. We use science, policy, litigation, and purchasing power to create real, tangible wins for public health. You're going to see a text to donate number throughout the town hall, and you can support us by going to it or by using ceh.org/donate. Also, if you're tweeting during the event, please use the hashtag CEH Town Hall. Before we get started, I just want to thank a few of our really generous sponsors of this series: Footprint, Lexington Law Group, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts, LinkedIn, and the Ponterea Fund. I also want to remind my friends, the participants, that CEH is a nonprofit organization, and consistent with our obligations under federal tax law, we don't take sides on any candidate campaign for election to public office. The purpose of this event is to educate the public about the important environmental issues today, not to influence the outcome of any election. We've already asked all the participants to honor that constraint, so let's get to the main event. I'm excited to introduce our panel of speakers who are leaders on the front lines of climate change and environmental health and environmental justice. We'll discuss how your vote is pivotal for the future of these movements. First, I'd like to introduce former Senator Barbara Boxer, a hero of mine, who served 24 years in the Senate and 10 in the House. While in the Senate, she chaired the Environmental and Public Works Committee and also worked to secure more than 1 million acres of wilderness to protect California's natural heritage. Senator, I know you have another meeting and you're going to need to leave halfway through. So Would you like to kick us off?
I'd be thrilled to. And thank you all, everyone within the sound of my voice, for helping this organization. When I started out in being an environmentalist, which was a long time ago, way back in the 70s, when Richard Nixon signed all those bills that gave us the Clean Air Act and Endangered Species Act and all those good things. When I started out in those days, the environment, the issue was not contentious. Everyone embraced it, and it really has changed throughout the years. So depending on your point of view, you really have an important decision to make. If you like the way things are going, it's one way, and if you're not, it's the other way, and that's entirely up to each of us to make that decision. But I think tying the environment to health is something that does not happen often enough. In my career, whenever I spoke on the floor of the Senate, I always made the connection, whether it was, a pipeline that was running through community, getting rid of tar sands, ash, all of these things were environmental justice issues, were social justice issues, were health issues. And that's why I love what you do. I'm going to watch my clock, but tell me when I have 30 seconds left, okay? Because as a former senator, we can go on. Well, I'm going to be straight from the shoulder and tell you what I think about what has happened the last 4 years. It's not good news, because everything I worked for so many years has either been repealed by executive order or is in the courts waiting for a decision. Part of the only good news we have is these things could be reversed, and the court could stop some of these bad things from happening. So as was basically mentioned, whatever your point of view, the environment is on the ballot, and let's make no mistake, and people are going to come down on whatever side they want, and that's America, and that's totally great. But I don't think the environment has been discussed enough in the context of this election. It's understandable with, losing all these people to COVID. It breaks your heart what is happening. It's hard to say, look at these laws that have repealed, the Clean Power Act and fuel economy. And so you've got to kind of connect those things to health, which is not hard to do. But in terms of COVID, one thing I will say, in some ways, it's a prelude of the type of planet we're moving toward if we don't do enough. Because I remember one of the things that was said to me in 2008, when I took over the committee, my very first hearing was on the environment. We had these fabulous experts in front of us, and they predicted everything, the fires, the droughts. One thing they predicted is that a lot of organisms can live in lakes when the lakes warm up that we're not used to. And there are terrible things that happen to people's health if we don't make a change here. So what we're looking at with COVID, you know, I hate to say it, you know, we could have these strange viruses and organisms and things happen to us that we don't know about yet. And if this is a drill, we're not doing very well. So I think environment and health, you've got it. That's a very important thing. You know, when I say everything's on the ballot, everything is on the ballot, because we now know 100 environmental rules and regulations are in the process of being overturned. We have about 70 that already have been overturned and 30 left. And it goes everything from, these are Barack Obama's executive orders that I supported. Fuel economy standards, the Clean Power Rule, joining the Paris Accord, making sure that we had methane standards and HFC standards, and California giving them the right to continue, our state setting our own emissions, fuel economy standards, all these things rolled back. And it means, you know, literally, I think it's 1.8 billion metric tons of greenhouse gases will be in the atmosphere as a result of these rollbacks. And just to give you an interesting talking point, that's more than the combined energy emissions of Germany, Britain, and Canada. That's what we could put up into the air. This is not the kind of America that I thought we were.
30 seconds.
30 seconds. So 64 rollbacks, 34 in progress, drilling on federal lands, drilling off our coast in the Alaska Wildlife Refuge. You know, if you believe in science, I know we all do, we know what's coming. We don't want an uninhabitable planet, and we don't want communities sick with all kinds of problems because of the lack of environmental justice. Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak with you.
Just getting to hear from you because you have been such a key fighter for the environment and had so much impact so far. And I'm just really grateful to get to be here with you.
Thank you.
Next is my friend, Mustafa Santiago Ali. He's the Vice President of Environmental Justice, Climate, and Community Revitalization at the National Wildlife Federation. He was also at the US EPA for 22 years, where he was one of the original staff at the Environmental Justice Office. Mustafa?
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, Senator Boxer and everyone else who's focused on our climate, but also on our most vulnerable communities. And if we're going to have real talk today, and I know we said that we were, then we really need to be able to unpack how did we get to the place that we are right now, and why is your vote so critically important in making sure that we can move forward in a positive direction, a direction that is inclusive of all people, but making sure that our most vulnerable communities are no longer unseen and unheard. And we know that our vote is critically important on the federal level, but also on the state, the county, and the local level, where many choices and decisions have been made to determine which communities would benefit from our advances and our sets of opportunities and our resources, and which communities would not be recipients of that. We also understand that there is a reason why folks have tried to stop certain folks from voting, and then, of course, suppressing that vote. And it is all tied to our environment. Now, in the environmental justice movement, we talk about our environment as about where we live, work, play, pray, and go to school. That means that all aspects of what's happening is tied to the environment. And if you don't have a voice, if you don't have a vote, then we understand how sacrifice zones have been created. These places where we put everything that nobody else wants. And it's because of restrictive covenants. It's because of redlining. It's because of certain communities are zoned as residential, where other communities are zoned as light industrial, and in some rarer instances as industrial. And we know that no one should ever be that close to polluting facilities. We also understand that if you want to really make change happen, if you really want to use your vote, then you've got to be looking at housing and transportation and our medical system, and also our environment and how it all comes together. If we have an honest conversation about policy in our country, we know that folks have utilized policy in the housing contest, especially around affordable housing, to sometimes place it in the least desirable locations. Although there's been some evolution over the years, we still have residual impacts from the choices that were made. We find affordable housing being placed in floodplains and next to polluting facilities. And we also know that we've got 100,000 people who die prematurely from air pollution each year in our country, and that's the conservative number. There's more people dying from air pollution than are dying from gun violence. More people are dying from air pollution than are dying from car crashes. All of those things are incredibly important. And we also know that there are chronic medical conditions that come from being located closely to many of these, toxic emitting facilities. And out of that, we have cancer clusters. We have liver and kidney diseases. We also have lung diseases. And we understand in this COVID-19 moment that if you have a pre-existing medical condition, it makes you more vulnerable. It makes you more vulnerable to infection, to hospitalizations, and to the loss of life. And we also understand that Black and brown communities and Indigenous brothers and sisters are 2.5 times more likely to actually lose their lives, 4.5 times more likely to be hospitalized. And our vote plays a role in that, because your vote helps to determine who are the individuals who are making the decisions about how you will be protected. What does the infrastructure look like in a country that has 80 million people who are uninsured and underinsured? And we know disproportionately there's folks of color in lower wealth white communities and Indigenous brothers and sisters, once again, who are the ones who are least likely to have the right types of medical protections, if we can say it that way. And we live in a country where we have 24 to 25 million people who are living in physician deserts and medically underserved areas. Our vote can help to make sure that dollars are flowing to the areas that need them the most to get that infrastructure in place, so that if we are dealing with the pollution that is coming from, these toxic emitting facilities, if the pollution or if the impacts are coming from COVID-19, or if the impacts are coming from a climate crisis, then we have that infrastructure that's in place. Our vote is critically important. It is critically powerful to help us deal with the 24 million people in our country who have asthma, the 7 million children, and again, disproportionate as African-American and Latinx folks who are going to the emergency rooms and the ones who are losing their lives. We can change that dynamic. We can utilize our vote to make sure that we got the right people in place and that there's accountability in that mechanism. Doesn't matter if you're Democrat, Republican, or independent, we have to hold everyone accountable to making sure that our lives are protected. I'm looking forward to the conversation today. And since I ran track, I know I'm at 5 minutes.
Thank you. That's inspiration. Okay, and last but definitely not least is Tamara Tolles O'Laughlin. She's an environmentalist who's been focused on equity, access, and community over the last 2 decades. She develops capacity building programs and creates multimedia campaigns to dismantle privilege and increase opportunities for vulnerable populations to access healthy air, clean energy, and a toxic-free economy at the local, regional, and national level. She's the North America director at an organization that I admire greatly, 350.org, where she supports and is accountable to organizers and campaigners in the US and Canada. As the leader of 350's programming in North America, she drives mission-critical work to invest in building a multiracial and multi-generational climate movement that's capable of holding our leaders accountable to science and justice. Tamara?
Hello. Hi, everybody. I am so glad to be in such a great company in this moment of compound crisis. Our good friend and sister has been raising the word syndemic. We're in a world of multiple pandemics, so many things going on at once that you're not quite sure what it is going to get you. So I just want to ground everything that I say in that reality, because as much as I would love to go on about the fact that we have 8 years to turn around the worst impacts of climate crisis, or that the US is the second highest emitter of CO2, and on an international level, we are an enormous actor in pushing out everything we fix to other places that then have to deal with it. I would love to spend a bunch of time talking about the fact that we're in flood and fire season, that people are suffering for systemic racism. But I actually think the most important piece of that that's relevant to climate and COVID and this compound crisis moment that matters for environmental health is Blackness. Where are we in support of Blackness everywhere that it shows up? In the higher end of statistics of people impacted in the ways that we are first and worst among many who are being harmed, how our poverty erasure is a part of a systemic design, about the fact that there isn't a single problem we have that the Black community hasn't been facing, dealing with, working their way through, and developing partnerships across racial lines to deal with since day one. I am here on behalf of many people, but I'm here today and sitting in Piscataway, Lumbee, and Cherokee territory. And I just want to flag that it is important for us to recognize the social determinants of health, the social construction of race, the idea that we have built ourselves into this box and it sucks. So as we start to have a conversation about how the heck we get out of it, my number one suggestion is that we form a human chain, because it's easier to get out of a ditch if you have someone who can help you. And if we do not deal with Blackness, with erasure, with poverty, there is nothing that we can do to help the environment or health or the places where they come together inside our own design. I would love to spend as much time as we can talking about what redesign looks like. What kinds of policies do we build to get out of what we have built for ourselves? How do we put a stop on the things that are harming us? How do we end fossil fuel so we can stop frittering away the moments we have left and the dollars we could crumb together to build what could develop the next set of on-ramps for the next generation who currently is only saddled with debt? Just so you know, Black people are hanging on the margins of every piece of that problem. And it's not by our waking, it's because of poor design. So I know with this group, there's going to be a lot of great stuff to talk about, but just wanted to raise it up, and we'll keep raising it. I was Black on the day I was born, and on the day I die, I'll still be Black. So until we make that the center of our conversations about why we end up in the places that we are not doing good work.
Thank you. Thank you. Sometimes it's hard to see the connection between a person's vote and the tangible effect it has on their local environment. Senator Boxer, since you need to leave earlier, I'm going to start by throwing this question out to you, but then I hope we can all have a dialogue too.
Sure.
How have you seen the power of citizens' votes influence government policies that create a healthier environment?
Well, I've seen it throughout my whole career. In every election I ever ran in, the environment was always an issue. It's an issue up and down the ballot. It's an issue that's now being intertwined, as has been pointed out magnificently today, with social justice. It's environmental justice, it's social justice. The fact of the matter is, when we join hands, which we must do, and we work together, it's going to mean that people who live in areas that are near freeways, okay, people who breathe air, dirty air, because they are near some of these plants. I spent a lot of my career talking about that and doing something about it. I'll give you one example, just so it's not a lot of words. It turned out there was this little oil drilling company that was located in a residential community, a beautiful community near USC, mostly Black and Latinx, a mix of other people. And the air quality was so bad that one of the parents reached out to me and said, my child is having nosebleeds and she's sick, and what are we going to do? And I showed up there. A lot of it is show up, and I went there and I met with this family. I had the press tagging along, and I met with this child, and she was explaining what happened. The air was thick with the smell. And guess what? It turned out that this little oil drilling company had been there forever and ever and ever, So they just grandfathered it in, and all these houses grew up around it. And then it was very heavily minority, not a lot of power in the community. And we found out that the Catholic Church actually owned the land. And we said, you can't do this. You know, they were making money, fine. They were collecting rent. We stopped it. And so what does that mean? It means that the environment was safe for everybody. Yes, the biggest health benefit went to the neighbors, but everybody in the community benefited from this. And I'll close with this. You know, one of the things that I always got hit with is from the start of my career, oh, environmentalism is elitism. You're an elitist. Well, that's so much baloney, because the truth is, if you're really super duper rich, you can buy yourself an environment, right? You can go anywhere you want. You could have acres surrounding you. You can go to the cleanest places. You know, most of us can't do that. We need to take care of home, and we need to take care of places that need us. So yes, every time I ran, environment was on the ballot. And I would go so far as to say, in this particular race, and I'm being very careful, I'm not saying who to vote for, I'm not doing that, because I respect what you're dealing with. You're totally, totally nonpartisan. Just get to know what's going on. Take a look at these rollbacks. If you love them, fine, you have one course. If you're worried, you have another course. And I always say, as a senator, the last thing, but I swear this is the last thing. I want to leave people with this. Regardless of your politics, nobody who's running for office is perfect. Trust me. I serve with so many, none of us is perfect. You can't find a perfect person unless you run yourself, and then you found the perfect person for you, and you'll agree with yourself all the time. So I do want to leave people with this. Yeah, you're going to find some people, you know what? I hated when he said that or when she said that. Put it aside. We are fighting for, in this election, my opinion, the planet itself, the people on the planet who need us, and democracy itself. And I want to thank you for including me in this stellar panel. They're beautiful, and I enjoyed all of you. Thank you so much.
Good to see you, Senator.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Mustafa, you worked at EPA for 22 years. That means you worked for William Riley all the way to Scott Pruitt, which is crazy. Yeah. And now, as you know, an activist like Tamara and me, how do you see environmental justice and the needs that are coming out of our quest for EJ inspiring people to vote in this election?
Well, you know, there are some really strong connections that are going on. And it's interesting that the environmental justice movement has been saying that I can't breathe, that we can't breathe, literally for decades. And I'm glad also that that is now being utilized in other contexts to bring attention to the injustices that continue to happen. So whether we're talking about the disinvestment of our communities, Black and Brown and Indigenous and lower wealth communities, and with that disinvestment comes the dehumanization that then allows law enforcement to think that they can put their knees on someone's neck until they can no longer breathe. Or in this COVID-19 moment, where we know that this disease, this virus, is literally suffocating so many of us. Or if we are talking about the fact that we've got folks living next to these facilities, as we talked about earlier, who literally are being asphyxiated by, you know, what's coming out, and how their bodies are constantly being under siege. Folks are now realizing the intersection of all these issues. And of course, you know, Tamara and myself, you know, we don't shy away from the fact that this is a part of systemic racism of how we got here, and how our vote can help to begin to change part of that, right? The other part of it is a cultural experience, a set of cultural shifts that have to happen, which are happening, which are scaring some folks because they are used to the status quo. but young people, folks of color, and in an intergenerational way are pushing for change to happen. So when you ask the question, from an environmental justice paradigm, all of these things are a part of our community. So they're all a part of environmental justice. And that's why our vote is so critically important, because to address the DAs or the judges or the chiefs of police, you have to be able to vote. And while you're voting on that local or county level, you are also at the same time with your vote able to address the zoning that's going on and where resources are moving on the local level. And of course, we know on the federal level that you have an opportunity to also make sure there's somebody at the Department of Justice and the Environmental Protection Agency and HUD and transportation and so forth and so on, and at CDC and HHS, who understand what's happening in our communities and are focused on making real change happen.
I live in the Bay Area, and we're seeing firsthand the effects of climate change. Just this morning, first thing my wife said to me was about the air quality today. Second thing she talked to me about was who's got COVID. And then Tamara, with special attention to policy, what's at stake for climate change at the local, regional, and national level in this election?
What isn't at stake? The quality of our air, our water, and our health are really just harbingers of the quality of our conviction. We are looking at people who are demanding to breathe. The policy that is pushing for that connects what we fund with what we could generate instead. So thinking really clearly about the investments we make as a marker. Our engagement in this system is about what we expect to get out of it. And so the Black vote, the climate vote, these are all a collection of people who are throwing down a marker when they step into the ballot box to say, I care. And then are pledging to continue being involved in a really protracted, messy conversation with a bunch of other folks who are all determining where your resources go, what kinds of things are legal and illegal, what kinds of behaviors are acceptable, what kinds of places people can live in, what conditions they are in, what it means to be weak or vulnerable or sick or able-bodied and struggling with mental health conditions brought on by every manner of thing. I mean, look out your window. If you aren't doom scrolling, you're about to be doom scrolling. So just flagging that we are in a moment where policy really does open up the conversation about whether or not we get jobs and infrastructure and human health, whether it's called a Green New Deal, a New Deal, no deal, whatever kind of deal you need it to be in the world of politics. We are always going to pay for jobs, infrastructure, and human health. If we are not making investments that make those choices healthful ones for people, they will never achieve. Like people think of environmental health and health in general as a target, but it's actually a horizon, and it's a combination of things that you reach when everything in the environment is working to support you. And you have optimal food and you have optimal conditions. So the achievement of health is not a static thing. It involves us working together in the ballot box, on the phone lines, phone banking, knocking on your neighbor's door from a safe distance, or dropping a leaflet on their doorstep to remind them to fill out all the documentation that's coming their way to make sure they stay up on the latest information, because it is rapidly changing as a function of disinformation. Making sure your neighbor knows what the latest information is on casting a vote might be the most neighborly thing you ever do. So it's an important time for us to think about policy that has to happen at the national level to divest from what we should no longer do and reinvest in the future so that people can breathe. At the local level, we need to focus on jobs, infrastructure, and human health. At the municipal level, Mustafa talked about it beautifully. People are zoned to death. It's time for us to start zoning people into life, into options, into choices that they can have, giving them a voice at every level so that it's not a fringe benefit to be able to weigh in on whether or not you will be killed by conditions you don't control. So I do think that whether or not communities are cited in 1, 2, or 3 unsafe zones at the same time should matter as much to the person who's elected into the White House as to the person who knocks on your door asking if you know who your city council person is. There are plenty of folks who can get in the way of a good time, and plenty of folks who can get in the way of things going awful if we all show up and do our jobs. And casting a vote is only the start of that conversation.
Yeah. I want to make sure that we don't, I want to make sure that we don't get in a dynamic where I'm asking questions, you guys are answering.
Oh, yeah,
Now
for
I think the three of us should be talking together.
Yeah.
So like me, both of you have been working to protect public health and the environment for a long time. How do you see how things have changed from when you were starting to do this work?
Mustafa, can I jump in?
Yes, please.
One thing I can notice is that that people of color are not being brought into crying in front of things in the ways that we used to. Like, I actually think there's a real strategic push to ask all of the folks who have been dealing with various kinds of oppression to jump into the conversation about what survival looks like. Turns out a lot of us need to survive. People who have been watching the crops growing differently, people who have watched the fish stop showing up where they used to, who can't plant things at the time when they might have. Those folks are people who are struggling for environmental justice, are noticing change, and have not been asked whether or not the conditions around them are changing. They have a lot of ideas about what coping looks like. And so I think one of the big differences is that we are actively listening to people as they experience things, creating space for them to build their own ways of work, funding people like the revolution must be resourced because it must be, and bringing together the conversation around what we're paying for versus what we need. Before it was polite, you had to be in polite company to raise an issue of money, but we all know resources are what communities need. They need space and they need resources to make redeterminations about what they need. And so I think more folks of privilege recognizing that, dismantling what they have become accustomed to, letting go of their own comfort and making room for the larger conversation. That feels like a real difference that's been hard won by generations of activists.
There have been so many changes, and then sometimes there's similarities to when I first started. I remember, and folks have heard me share this story, when I first started as a student at EPA, walking down to the first ever environmental equity meeting. That tells you how long I've been doing this. And I looked like I was about 14, 15 years old at that time. And there were two older white gentlemen who were middle managers at the agency. And I remember walking behind them and hearing them say, I don't know why we're going to this meeting, because the things that these folks are sharing can't be true. They must be lying. And these were folks who had a responsibility for protecting the public health of everyone who's inside of our country. And sometimes I think back to that moment and then tie it to right now in this climate movement where we have climate deniers, right? Who will say that climate change is a hoax, that the impacts that people see with their own eyes, just like environmental justice communities and leaders were seeing things with their own eyes that were happening. Now in this climate crisis moment, we have a very similar set of dynamics that are happening. But the beauty of this moment is that the science is now there. It is undeniable. It is undeniable about the impacts that are happening in Black and Brown and Indigenous communities. It is also undeniable about the climate emergency that we find ourselves in, unless you just refuse to not utilize what my mama would call your common sense. So that is a blessing, that it is less about convincing folks and more about how do we get the solutions in place to make change happen. One of the other blessings of this moment is that finally, that foundations and other philanthropic entities are beginning to move their portfolios to the places that if they had done it 30, 40 years ago and they are not in it by themselves, we could have made significant change. And let me just call this out, because lots of times we have these climate related conversations and we don't tell the fullness of what really got us where we are. If those of us who say that we care about the environment and climate, whether we are politicians or we are practitioners or others, had paid attention to what was happening in our most vulnerable communities, when we had all of these fossil fuel facilities being located in these communities, making people sick, and shooting out all these emissions. At that time, we were like, oh, well, it's just them folks over there on the other side of the tracks. And now that same pollution is what's warming up our oceans and our planet. If we had paid attention to the fossil fuel infrastructure, that 2.4 million miles of pipeline that you can go to the moon and back, to the moon and back, and then on your way to the moon again, running through farmland, running through low-income white land, ending up in Black and brown communities, we wouldn't have as much of a problem as we currently do if we had paid attention and stopped taking land away from Black farmers and giving it to big conglomerates, and then not honoring the voices of indigenous and other folks who have been actually for millennia protecting our forests and our jungles, then we probably wouldn't have the same situation that we do. In this moment, young people, intergenerational movements, some who have been blessed with wealth and others who are evolving in that position are coming together and demanding change, as Tamara had shared, and others, to make real change happen. And people are also understanding, and if folks don't take anything else away from what we're sharing, the power that exists inside of your vote and how you can address many of these ills of the past, but also be focused on a brighter future with this new clean economy. And I'll just call this out as I close. We don't want to transfer the sins of the fossil fuel economy to this new clean economy where Black and brown folks are only given, the most menial jobs in that space, where they're not truly represented as owners in that space and in the framing out of the direction that we have to go. And again, that's tied to your vote. So I don't care who you are. If you are not truly focused on being a real ally, you do not deserve our vote.
Heck yeah.
So
I just want to add really quickly that we've been talking about activism and science and justice and using a lot of terms to talk about how people fit in this conversation. Voting is an act of it's activism. It was when we fought for it. It was when different parts of our identities fought for it to be seen. It is now in a moment where we are under threat, where the ways that we cast our vote are a political question when they shouldn't be. It is activism to vote. It is activism to donate. It is activism to stand on behalf of other people. And for the 204,000 people who will not be casting a vote because they've been taken down by malfeasance, we have no right to question whether or not we will cast a vote. The question is, how quickly can you do it?
Yeah.
And what can you do to defend the other people's right to vote?
And as Tamara said, who else you going to get to go to the polls or to the drop-off box or to whatever the other mechanisms are to make sure that that happens?
So let's go to that. So what are some actions that people can take now to help get out the vote?
Ooh. Phone banking. It's time to call a friend. Time to phone a friend. If you don't have any friends, find me at 350.org and we will help you find some new friends. People love to chat, especially folks who've been shut in their houses for 6 months. So you want to make some friends, start phone banking. On Wednesdays and Sundays, we do it. It is nonpartisan. And what we're saying to people when we call them is, here's the latest information. The state said you could vote here. The boxes have now been moved to there. So we're just making sure people have the latest information. If they're not watching their mailbox, they know where they're going to go. So I do think taking an active moment, if you're in a place where you have voted by mail for a long time, then you have an obligation to get on the phone and call people for whom this is their first time to do it, because you can really weaponize the knowledge that you have to help someone else make a difference. So if you feel safe and like your vote is fine, then go help someone else, whether that's phone banking, teaching people how to deal with the ballot, making sure people who are hard of hearing and have vision issues get this updated information. Just be a member of your community and recognize that all of the assets we are fighting to hold on to are only the tip of the conversation.
So there it is. There it is.
So before we hang up, Andrea from our policy team is going to talk about a couple opportunities to join a CEH phone bank. So we're definitely coming back to that because it's already all queued up. Here's one that just came in from somebody who is watching right now. Mustafa, can you share how you made a difference in training people while you were at EPA, both people in the agency back in the day, but also in communities at that time and now?
Well,
I don't want to constrain this just to Mustafa. That's just how they wrote the question.
No worries.
No, I was really blessed. I think it was about over 5,000 people that I had trained. And then we also had a training collaborative with all kinds of great folks, both inside and outside the agency, who went through our train the trainer program, and then exponentially it began to grow. For me, it's always been rooted in the principles of environmental justice and the Jimenez principles, and how we engage and how information is shared and the anchoring that happens there, and in what communities are asking for, whether it was training or other products or, grant programs, whatever it is that was created. It was always based upon what communities were asking for. And we knew that, one, we needed to make sure that the federal family, not just EPA, was trained on environmental justice, and that all these other affiliates and other entities also had to begin to have a better understanding of it if we were ever going to really be able to have a holistic strategy. So it was all about sitting down with communities, talking about what are the information that needs to be shared, crafting that, running it back out again and saying, this is what we came up with. Are there still gaps in it? And then making sure that those voices were also a part of the trainings whenever and wherever possible. And that's the model, if Mrs. Ramirez, Mr. Johnson doesn't see value in it, you shouldn't be doing it. And if they do, then you keep running it by them and saying, is there something else we should be sharing or doing? And we were blessed that we trained a lot of folks, but the reality is if people are still getting sick and people are still dying, that there is much, much more work that needs to be done.
Fully support. And over at 350, we are throwing down, not just in the ways that people are used to seeing us. Our training and political education and public education work is the other thing that we provide as a resource. Upcoming in October, we have Solidarity School. We will help you to understand the science, help you figure out how to deal with the multiple and complex things we are facing, and teach you how not to be a jerk while you're delivering the service of the knowledge you have gained. It's important for us to really underscore that, because the welcome mat for doing this work is how you show up. So join us for Solidarity Schools. We're doing a few mass training webinars on how to exercise your vote, how to interpret the things that you care about, and how to push other people to do the same. Also, we just concluded a town hall called Climate Town Hall called Stronger Than Storms that featured a whole bunch of great folks from Louisiana and Puerto Rico and North Dakota who are pushing for this work. We'll be doing more of that. So find us on 350.org. We are training people locally. We are training people nationally. We are training people in multiple languages in simultaneous translation. So join us if you have something to say about this work and you need a little support to do it.
Thank you. Thank you for that, for all of that, including that last part. So here's the next one. How do you see the intersection of COVID and environmental justice evolving in the next year?
Tamara, you want to take it? You want me to go?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start it off by saying they're the best friends that have ever been made, because nothing that's happening in COVID isn't particularly tied to the poor design that we have created. So being an African American is being marked for a lot. And whether or not you reach your full potential is about how quickly you dodge what has been designed to befall you. And COVID is just the next in a long series of things that have befallen this community, and we're still here. So I just want to say it's been a rough road, and I know Mustafa has a lot to add, but there's no secret sauce to our people getting hurt. We're being put out front to get hurt. We have been essential workers. We are essential workers. We are essential people. And every time we're needed, it requires something. COVID is the next thing coming. What are we going to do as a community to build a better buffer around essential people?
Mm-hmm. It's put a spotlight on the broken infrastructure in our country. And of course, as Tamara shared, we know whom are the ones who are the least recipients of positive infrastructure. It has shown folks that even in our public health spaces, that the collection of data has not been equal, even though folks have been trying to push in that direction. When COVID first hit, there was very little information that was coming out about the impacts that were happening in Black and Brown and Indigenous communities. And the world literally had to shout to get a administration to pay attention and to begin to actually do something about making sure that the existing infrastructure was capturing it and pointing out where there were gaps in that infrastructure that will help us with so many issues. And then also on the medical side, it also shown, that folks could not even get a test. They could not get to a doctor. And then also the biases that were brought on by years and years of neglect in relationship to folks of color was also made apparent. So COVID, as devastating as it has been, has also put a spotlight that folks can no longer hide. Folks can no longer not do the things that are necessary, and we'll tie it into our vote, that people are going to hold folks accountable if they haven't been doing the right thing, or if it's not a part of the plan of those who say that they want your vote.
That's right. It's the reckoning. Might as well be. Everything else is happening.
Okay, so I think we have time for one more question. Can you talk a little bit more, and this is something we've been talking about a lot already, but about the intersection of environmental health, social justice, and voting right now?
So everything? You want to talk about everything? Yeah, I just wanted to mic check on that one. Because
wherever you want to go.
That is the intersection of everything. Yeah. Voter suppression is the most underreported crime in the world. Ever since people have been fighting for the right, people have been fighting to obscure that. In this moment where sickness, where defense of your health is a factor in whether or not you cast a vote, whether or not you have access to care or access to people who will care with you to help you cast your vote. If you don't have easy access to make these choices on your own, these are all implicated. The failure of our infrastructure to build in jobs where people can flex in and out of a crisis moment, or to build policy that supports people, even if they cannot support themselves, because we pay for it anyway. Even if we weren't altruistic, we pay for it. There are no social services that do not come out of everybody's pocket. The least we could do is be responsible about it so that people can have dignity and give themselves the opportunity to make good on what has been invested in them. Instead, we treat people to shame. We build policies that make people feel small, in agencies that make people feel invisible and like they should be embarrassed because they can't do any or everything perfectly. So I do think that what the other thing that's on the ballot is who's going to lead all of these things. Who's going to give us not just the money to start the next generation, but the systems in which we run it. Well, who's going to make sure that trauma, care, and repair are factored into the services that are provided to people? Because guess what? We're all traumatized. If you have a television and you've been watching it recently, and on any election season, you're probably going to get PTSD. But this one is particularly fraught with things that make it hard to maintain your humanity. People need trauma, care, and repair. People need to be seen. Their pain needs to be processed, and we need to rebuild our emotional state before we can participate in any other part of it. So I do think we need to be really clear, as Mustafa said, to support people who know what's wrong, who are speaking to people, who are doing a better job of listening than they do talk, and are making sure what they build in their work is recognizable to the people on the street. So if we are not making sure that everybody is taken care of, then we aren't going to be doing a good enough job going into the future we're headed towards.
It's really simple. Vote like your life depends on it, because it literally does. 7 years and a couple months, and we know we're at the tipping point in relationship to climate change, right? So no matter where you are in the United States of America, and of course around the planet, those impacts are going to get you, right? You may be physically under duress because of floods, hurricanes, wildfires, extreme heat, which of course is tied to the public health work that many of us do. And if you're not voting, then you're going to have individuals that I ran track, and in my head, I hear the gun go off. I know how long it takes to get around that track. I also know how much time that we have left before we get to that tipping point where no matter what we do, we won't be able to mitigate enough of this. And I also know who's going to be hit first and worst, right? Yeah. And I also know if you want to move down from a global level back down to more exactly what's happening in our country, we know that what's going on in relationship to food. COVID showed you how crazy people got when they couldn't go to the grocery store. Yeah. So imagine the impacts that are going to happen when we can't grow food in many locations, and our crop yields are going to be minimized in other locations. We know when folks are under stressors, tribalism comes in. People want to defend resources. And we also know that we're also in a moment now where we're arming everyone. Anybody can get a gun and anybody can act crazy. Your vote, once again, plays a role. If we're going to have legislation, if we're going to have a set of actions that are common sense, that says that we don't need to have firearms everywhere, especially when some people don't know how to act, right? I'm not taking away anybody's gun, but I'm saying if you don't know how to act in a responsible way, then, then you shouldn't be able to do that. And then if you come down another level, we understand the realness of what folks are dealing with these everyday impacts. And Tamara also brought in, and I hope people paid attention to, the mental health impacts that are going on. In our country, we already got lots of folks who are dealing with depression and dealing with a number of other, impacts that are happening in our mental health space. And then you overlay it by all this pollution that folks are dealing with. You overlay it with the systemic racism that impacts folks of color the most, but some white brothers and sisters are also feeling it. We got a chance to change that. If we vote, if we get people in who actually care about humanity, if we get people who actually understand that our country becomes stronger because of diversity, and not just diversity, so you see black and brown faces, but that all the intellect and innovation that they bring helps to make real change happen, then you understand the power of your vote. And if you don't do it, the only person you have to blame for the things that will come is the person you see when you look in the mirror.
And also, I'll blame you. I just want to make sure you know in advance that if you sit on your fine china and you don't vote, I will blame you.
So let's make it super real right now. So I'm going to bring in Andrea Braswell. So she's on our policy team and she's leading our work, our nonpartisan work to help get people to vote. And so I think they're going to, the tech folks are going to bring Andrea on, and she's going to give us some insights on what people can do. Hi, Andrea.
Hi. Thank you, panelists, for that truly just moving conversation. I'm going to tie it all together with some messaging from our partner, Democracy Initiative. So let's make sure your vote counts. Check your registration. Know the rules in your state and make a plan. Vote early, no matter what method you're using. Visit an early voting registration center. If you're voting by mail, mail your application back right away. When you get your ballot, return that back right away. If you're voting on election day, vote safely and vote early. So step up, volunteer to be a poll worker. Share what you know with your friends, family, and colleagues to help them make a voting plan too. Be patient. Please know that this election is not over until all votes are counted and certified by state and local election officials. Please join CEH and March On's Voter Protection Corps for a bipartisan phone bank on October 8th and October 15th. We'll drop the registration link in the chat. Let's own our power as voters and empower others to do the same.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Tamara. Thank you, Mustafa. Thank you, Senator Boxer. It's such a deep honor for me personally to get to spend this time talking to you, and then for everyone. If you enjoyed today, please donate to CEH at ceh.org/donate, or by texting GIVE to 510-288-3065. That's GIVE to 510-288-3065. Really grateful to you all for getting to be with me here today. And I also want to just thank everyone and wish everyone a really good day.
Thank you all.
Take care.
You too.